Hi, I'm Norman Perlo, a furniture designer maker at Perlo Design and a woodworking educator author at WoodSkills. So wood is removed in thousandths of an inch, unlike any piece of machinery, any power tool. It's almost impossible to achieve that, to remove wood that thin. And the next, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, is to count shavings. Learn to finally set a hand plane, because in all cases I'm using a hand plane for shooting board. It's or face planing or edge planing a board. Learn to finally set a hand plane, iron, and can count the shavings. So this is it's something you achieve after using hand tools or hand planes for a while, is to be able to master the concept of counting shavings. So for example, 3 or 4 tooth thou shavings is 10 thousandths of an inch. If you're hand planing multiple boards, and I'll just give an example. To demonstrate using a hand plane and determining the thickness of a small block of wood, a small strip of wood, using again that concept of counting shavings, using a hand plane. I'm using in this case, a shop-made plug-in planing stop. So I have a series of these. This is a different one. I have some that hook over the edge, but these are they're just plug-in planing stops that I can quickly remove and insert to be able to plane, in this case, the faces of a small board. So I use I'll check for grain orientation. I would use the hand plane to so if you notice, this is calibrated hand plane and very sharp. If you notice, the shavings are full width, which was I was mentioning earlier, and they're extremely thin. I mean, the next step after this, you can notice all the serrations. The next step would be there wouldn't be much left, so this would probably be as fine as I'd go with the shaving. So once you've determined the thickness of the shaving, you could use a caliper for this, as I mentioned. Or you can begin to count the shavings, and if you're creating multiples of these same components, you can actually dial it in and bring them down to size or thickness just by counting these shavings. So if I have 4 or 5 of these or 6 of these pieces, these components for furniture, I would hand plane them, and just if the plane is the hand plane set up correctly, because you're using the same hand plane to work all 6 pieces, you can actually count the shavings. So for example, 4 shavings per board, and I know that I've gone down only so much without even having to measure or remeasure the board, the thickness. It's an advantage, and something you'll start to become familiar with when you work with hand planes more. Something to keep in mind. So it's not just removing wood, but try to use the actual process of removing wood to your advantage by working with the thickness of a shaving and counting the shavings. Now that's an example of a very thin, super thin shaving. This is a bird's mouth plug-in jig that I use for some work. And I'll just give an example of what I'm referring to, just to make sure that the grain orientation is correct. This works with 2 wedges, so I wedge the piece in, and this allows me to work the edge of a small board. And this is a shorter board, but I can just as easily attach this, use this board, and wedge this in. And so it's an excellent little jig that plugs into your workbench. It allows you to work small edges. So actually, we'll use this. And get the orientation correct. I'll use a large smoother. Just happen to have this handy. So this is an example of what I'm referring to. So it's important to both take wide shavings. What I mean by wide is is the full width of the surface you're hand planing, in this case an edge. So it's important, if you take the full width, the shaving of the full width, your hand planing is uniform, so you're not very unlikely to introduce a tilt, a bevel in that surface. This round for this one. So, demonstration of this. So you can see the shaving is super thin, and it's actually the full width of that edge. So that's critical. So try to set your hand plane, try to tune it, adjust it, so you actually achieve this full width and a paper thin, actually much less than paper thin shaving. And this determines how much wood you're removing from a surface or an edge. And use this to count. If you count the number of shavings, this is, for example, counting these shavings, you can easily achieve the width of this, in this case, the correct width, without having to resort to any measuring tools. So it's a difficult concept to explain, but I think I've made it clear that it's the next level of hand planing. So you're not just only hand planing, but you're introducing more precision into your hand planing, and by counting shavings and ensuring that the shavings are the correct width. So another advantage of the hand plane is that it produces a finished surface while dialing in a measurement. Along with dialing in that precise thickness of a board or edge, that finished surface is also ready to glue or ready to use in a joint. So there isn't an additional step to perform. It's glue ready or ready for joinery. That's a huge advantage. If you're using machines, more than likely even a table saw or with a fine blade, you'll need to somehow work the edge or the face to have it glue ready. I try to avoid sanding as much as possible in my work. I almost use very little or no sanding at all. And so because I use hand plane so much, I achieve that nice finished surface without any rounding of edges. When you're sanding, you're most likely going to round the edge. Even if you try to avoid it, you're not going to have these crisp edges, and they become rounded over. So if you're joining two boards and you've sanded the surfaces, you are going to introduce a gap at either the top or bottom of the edge. But using a hand plane will ensure that this gap doesn't exist. So I can't advocate the use of hand planes more in your work, because it's so much nicer than using sandpaper. And sandpapers tend to abrade the surface and crush the fibers. Another disadvantage to using sandpaper in your work, whereas a sharpened hand plane will instead slice the fibers. So the glue absorbs better adhesion, and finishes absorb better too, for that matter. So glue ready edges are created with a hand plane, unlike any other method using machines. So wood moves and releases tension when acclimating, so continually test boards or components for flatness. Usually when I'm processing or when I'm creating furniture, I let the wood acclimate or stabilize, and I reduce it in size and in increments, in stages. So I'll reduce it in size, and I'll never in one stage bring it right down to the final thickness or dimension that I need. I'll do it in stages, because the woods are still, there is a tension in woods that needs to be released. So by doing it in stages, you're allowing the wood, the components, to slowly release that tension and acclimate, and this avoids any twisting, cupping, bowing in the wood. And this has worked really well for me, so I strongly advocate doing that. It does take a little longer because you have to do it in stages. So typically you can do this over a period of 2 or 3 days of reducing a board down to final thickness and keeping it in the environment, the shop environment that you're going to be building the furniture. And again, flatness ensures good fitting joints. I use a spokeshave in my work, which essentially is a hand plane with a short sole. Spokeshave is used on the curved or rounded surfaces, and the iron is installed bevel down. And I have an example of one. There are 2 versions of typical spokeshaves have flat bottom sole or round bottom sole. The flat bottom sole will probably get you by for most of your work, and the more the convex spoke shave is more applicable to a very concave surface, because this just doesn't work on a concave surface. So I have a second one, but I tend to use this flat bottom sole. So it's essentially a small hand plane, worked with more versatile and more workable using two hands, and the iron is installed again beveled down, much like a hand plane. And it's either they come in different versions. This one has a manual adjustment, but there are versions, a Veritas version that has a micro adjust, so that's nice too. I just happen to have these ones, but I tend to use a spoke shave in my work for edges and working edges and removing the roughness of a board, and that I can't normally attain through a hand plane. So I just wanted to point that out. This is the curved bottom one. It isn't very curved bottom, but it's sufficiently curved bottom to be able to work concave surfaces. So again, there's considerable precision using spoke shave. Again, you find shavings, removing fine shavings and counting shavings. Another tool I like to use for precision is a hook rule. I strongly advocate getting yourself a hook rule, because it isn't just a ruler, it's got the hook at the end. And what the hook does is allows you to do precise measurements without worrying about, if I didn't have a hook, I would need to ensure that the end of the ruler is exactly at the end of the board if I'm offsetting to a certain point in the middle of the wood. But having this hook automatically ensures that if you're creating multiple components and they need to be a certain length, the hook rule ensures consistency between components, so that works really well. So I strongly advocate this. I've got about 3 or 4 in the workshop now. They're sold through Lee Valley Tools, and this is a Utilitas version, and they come in different lengths. I only have the 12-inch versions, but I understand you can get shorter 6-inch versions now. And along with that, there's a stop rule, and I'll give you an example of a stop rule. It almost serves the same purpose, but what it does is it allows you to transfer a particular width or length from one board to another. So this is a stop rule. At one point I was creating a few of my own tools. Here's some of the tools I created. And a center finder tool and a tri-square, a small tri-square. And this is a stop rule. So what this does is if I'm offsetting at this point in a board and I need to transfer this exact width, this measurement, I would lock it in and then use this measurement to transfer that to a second board. And that's, and just slide it along and mark with a pencil. Just slide it along and mark with a pencil. So that it's very effective for that reason. This has a shorter rule, which is removable, and I can easily insert a 12-inch rule here. But so again, the stop rule, you can either create your own. This is a wood-based one that I was marketing for a while, or you can purchase an attachment through any woodworking tool retailer that clamps onto a ruler and performs the same function. The panel gauge creates a scribed line from an edge. Panel gauge is essentially a very large marking gauge, and the line is consistent in a precise distance from an edge along the length. So this is essentially a very large marking gauge, and I don't have a panel here, but I'll give you an example. So you place this along an edge and scribe the line. There's a little scribing disc, and scribe the line along. The advantage of a panel gauge is it works well with large wide panels, unlike a marking gauge is really designed for smaller boards, and I'll show a marking gauge. So please subscribe to my YouTube woodworking channel, where I share more of my woodworking techniques, my woodworking philosophy, my thoughts on woodworking, and all the challenges I've experienced, and I introduce some of the new forms of woodworking I've discovered. And also visit woodskills.com, where I have a good selection of my books, both in print and digital format, on woodworking, and all my online courses, and I also offer some woodworking plans. I have maintained a regular blog on what I've got going on in my workshop and in woodworking in general. So enjoy.